The clock struck 12, and John stared at the buildings around him, watching them go through their last transformation of the day, which is to say they were reversing into yesterday's versions. The new day was dawning once again in this little town, a day much like any other for everyone except him. John was a detective with the NYPD, called in to investigate a case of missing persons. People who seemingly vanished without a trace. But there was something odd about the town. The entire place erased itself every midnight, reset the world to yesterday, and then repeated the cycle endlessly. And John was the only one who remembered the past. It was torture. He watched as the buildings morphed back into their yesterday selves. The dry cleaners became a clothing store. The fancy French restaurant reverted back to a greasy spoon. The skyscrapers that marked the town's skyline lost a few stories, turning them into apartment complexes. It had been happening for over a month now, and the town seemed intent on erasing itself from existence, not for the fact that John had been experiencing it firsthand. He would have assumed it was a dream, maybe a side effect of an experimental drug he'd been given to help his insomnia. But no, he was stuck reliving the same day over and over, forced to live out a never-ending Groundhog Day. At first, he'd tried to warn people. He'd raced down streets, yelling at passers-by to get away before the world reset, all of them disappearing into thin air right before his eyes. They looked confused, thought he was mad. Then he stopped trying. It hurt too much. As the sun rose and the town reassembled itself anew, John got into his car and drove into the city.
Ow.
Every day when the town reset, so did the police station. Every day he met a new chief. Every day the chief was skeptical about what John told him, believing him to be delusional until the chief disappeared along with everyone else. Then John would explain it all over again to the next chief, hoping that someday someone would believe him. So far, no luck. On the drive, he passed by faces that were becoming more familiar. People who worked in shops or sat on park benches feeding the birds. Faces that, if he'd had time he'd have learned the names of, would have asked where they were from and why they came here. People who died with the sunset and were reborn with the sunrise. When he reached the police station, he saw a new chief waiting for him. Chief Thompson, a hefty man with a handlebar mustache. Yesterday's chief had a pencil-thin mustache. The day before that, he'd had a full beard, but John couldn't remember the chief's name from one day to the next. "You're late," the chief said, not bothering to hide his impatience. "I expect better from you." John nodded. Didn't matter. No one remembered what happened the day before. What did I miss? And John explained it all. The missing persons cases, the resetting world. The chief listened patiently, tapping his fingers against his desk, then stood up and walked to the window.
Oh.
John followed him. "Interesting theory, detective, but we don't have anything to go on here. Not a single clue to suggest that this town disappears every day. Now, if we can put this little fantasy of yours aside, I want you to take another look at the Wilson case. I need you to ask Mrs. Wilson if she saw her husband leave the house. Ask her if he went somewhere after dinner." Mrs. Wilson. John knew Mrs. Wilson. Every day she stood by the window and watched the river flow by. Today she was knitting a scarf, sitting in a rocking chair on her porch. She didn't look up as John approached her house. She knew he was there. All the townspeople knew he was there. "Are you here about my Harold?" she asked. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about your husband. When last saw him, do you think he left town?" She nodded slowly. "He got on a train, the last train going south, but he wouldn't have done that. Not without telling me, not without saying goodbye." Her voice cracked, and she dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. John felt a pang of sympathy for the woman. Losing her husband must have been horrible, but Harold wasn't gone. He was right here in this town, just like everyone else. He was just invisible. John visited everyone he could think of, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. He talked to anyone who might have seen anything, heard anything. He learned that Harold had argued with someone at the train station, an argument that turned physical. But when John went to the train station to investigate, he found nothing. The platforms had been ripped away, and the tracks lay dormant. There were no trains here. There never had been. What had the people of this town been hiding? Then John noticed a girl sitting on a nearby bench. She was drawing a picture of the station. It looked like the girl was the only one who remembered what had been here. He sat beside her. "Do you remember what happened here?" She nodded. "There was a fight. Two men arguing over a train ticket. One pushed the other. Then the ticket machine spat out money. Then everything disappeared. And you remembered. Yes, for the first time since this nightmare began, John felt a flicker of hope. Someone else remembered. Maybe together they could solve this mystery. Maybe they could undo the curse, whatever it was that plagued this town. John asked the girl's name. She told him it was Alice. He smiled. At least he wouldn't forget that. He asked her if she knew where she lived, and she led him to a Victorian-style home at the end of the street. John thanked her and knocked on the door. He couldn't believe how hopeful he suddenly felt. Maybe he was making progress. Maybe he would finally break the cycle. Maybe he would finally go to sleep without dreaming of endless hallways and unfinished business. The front door opened. A young woman stood before him. She looked about Alice's age, maybe younger. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Is Alice home?" "Who's asking?" "My name is John. I'm a friend of Alice. May I come in?" The girl stepped aside, allowing John entry into the house. "Alice isn't here," she said, and John's blood ran cold. Was this the daughter of Mrs. Wilson? Why was she living with a stranger, and why did she know his name? "Where's Alice?" he asked. "Don't you recognize me, John?" the girl asked. "It's me. It's always been me." He shook his head, confused. "Think hard, John," the girl urged. "Am I?" John closed his eyes, straining to remember. The girl stepped closer, and the faint scent of honeysuckle filled his nostrils. He opened his eyes and gasped. "Sarah," he whispered. The girl threw her arms around him. "It's me. I've always been here. We've always been here. Don't you remember, John? You were supposed to protect us?" And John remembered. He remembered Sarah, his daughter, who had died years ago. He remembered the endless hallways of his dreams, the ones he'd escaped from each morning. He remembered because in his dreams he'd met Sarah. In his dreams, he'd held her hand and told her he would find her, and he had. He had found her here in this town, a town that existed outside of time. Trapped between the twilight of yesterday and the dawn of tomorrow, doomed to repeat itself over and over and over. "How did we get here?" Sarah asked. "How did we become trapped in this endless night?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I won't let it happen anymore. We're getting out of here. Together." As John held his daughter close, he vowed to free them both from this prison. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had Sarah. And as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. And as the clock struck midnight, and the world began to shift and change, John and Sarah stood hand in hand, ready to face the endless night together.